Chapter 82. Let's go. After having a good lunch at Philip's house, Jiang Hai waved his hand. Robbins and Belle, who had nothing to do today, followed him and drove Robin's modified snowmobile towards the distant forest. Because it was snowing, the snow on the entire pasture was more than 10 centimeters thick. Even if the cows were released to graze, they would need to consume more energy to do so. Of course, Jiang Hai's pasture wasn't like this, but Robbins and the others didn't know that. Jiang Hai also didn't intend to point it out. It was a good choice to let the cows fatten up in the cowshed. Because the cows stayed in the cowshed, there were fewer cowboys. What they needed to do every day was to keep the cowshed ventilated, clean up the cow dung, feed the cows, add water, and occasionally brush their hair. That was all. The 5 cowboys were originally very busy every day. But after winter they had some time to take a break. Of course, the so-called break was not real rest. It meant that they could do some work that had nothing to do with the cowshed, such as patrolling the surroundings of the manor to see if the fence was broken, repairing the machinery, or maintaining the house. It was just that they did not have to deal with the cows for the time being. This was considered a break. Compared to the cowboys, Edward Anderson, who was only a sailor, was much more miserable. Every day he had to go out to sea. The biting cold sea breeze on his face was not much worse than a blade. Jiang Hai's body couldn't bear it. Robbins and Belle, who were resting today, patrolled around the manor in the morning. A manor like this needed to be patrolled every day, especially in winter. After winter, the beasts in the mountains would come down due to the lack of food. If they broke the fence and entered the manor to hunt the cows and sheep, it would be a big problem for the manor owner. Of course, there was another problem, which was to guard against people. Therefore, they had to patrol the area every day. As for the maintenance of the house and machinery, they didn't have to worry too much. The reason for that was because those houses were all extremely sturdy when they were built. Wu Quan did not have the intention to cut corners. Every villa was built with reinforced concrete and the roof was the same. Except for the need to shovel away the snow every spring to prevent water from seeping in, there was no problem with the houses here. Most of the machinery was bought by Jiang Hai this year, so naturally there wouldn't be any problems. Therefore, these people only had half a day to work during the rest of the day. They could still do their own things in the afternoon. However, they had to accompany their boss to go hunting this afternoon. Whoosh whoosh. Following the sound of the engine, the 3 snowmobiles sped towards the forest in the distance. Long before the arrival of winter, Robbins had unloaded 3 of the 4-wheeled motorcycles that Jiang Hai had bought. Actually, it was only a few parts and 4 tires that were removed. A cowboy like this was actually a little expert in hands-on work. At least this kind of transformation was easy. The position of the front wheel of the motorcycle was replaced with 2 sledge boards. Because the 4 motorcycles that Jiang Hai bought were very big, 2 sledge boards were needed at the back periphery to make the motorcycle float in the snow. As for the propulsion device, it was a caterpillar. The position of the rear wheel was replaced with 2 caterpillar tracks, but the position was slightly higher than that of the sledge. This snowmobile was considered to be completed. Not only could it run in the snow, but it could also run on land. Of course, it wasn't as fast as the tires, but the problem was that the tires couldn't run in the snow. It wasn't the first time that Jiang Hai rode this thing. Although it wasn't very good, at least it was decent. After riding for a while in the snow, Jiang Hai and the others also parked their motorcycles outside the forest. Then they changed into snow boots, took their weapons and walked into the forest. Of course, Jiang Hai's 2 followers, Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, were also very interested after learning that they were going to play in the forest. This forest was planted by the former owner of this manor. The original idea was very simple. Planting some trees could be used to block the sea breeze. If there was a need, these trees could be cut down in the future to build a house or something else. Even if they were to sell it, they would still be able to make a lot of money, right? But unfortunately, before the trees grew, he went bankrupt. In the end, he packed them up and sold them to the auction house. The trees here, after all these years of growth, could now be said to be mature. The trees in the United States were also different from the trees in China. In the north of China, there were basically a few kinds of trees: birch, willow, pine, cypress, and so on. There were also these trees here, but there weren't many. According to Robbins, there were about 5,000 trees in Jiang Hai's forest. 2,000 of them were oak trees. This kind of tree was also called oak tree or oak tree. The tallest tree grew more than 30 meters. This kind of tree also existed in China, but it wasn't too common. Because the branches of this kind of tree were too soft, it wasn't very popular in China. There were only 2 kinds of trees in China. One was used to build houses and the other was used to make furniture. This kind of soft tree was used to build houses. The house would collapse if it was used to make furniture. In addition to being moisture-proof and insect-proof, it wasn't very sturdy. Hearing its roar, Jiang Hai and the others who were walking in front were shocked. They turned around and saw that Xiao Bai was having a conflict with a squirrel. It left them speechless, but Bell still signaled Jiang Hai with his eyes to control Xiao Bai. Otherwise, if it continued to roar, they would have to return empty-handed today. Although Jiang Hai was a rookie, he was not stupid. When it came to hunting, it naturally had to be quiet. Was it really okay to roar so openly? Therefore, he was about to turn back and tell Xiao Bai to shut up, but before Jiang Hai could move, the squirrel on the tree saw that Xiao Bai was not chased away by the oak fruit. It was also angry and took another rubber fruit and threw it at Xiao Bai. Although Xiao Bai already had the intention to dodge, it still dodged. However, this time the oak fruit hit its back. Although it did not hurt, Xiao Bai was still angry. This little guy actually dared to be so cocky in front of it. It really could not tolerate it. As Xiao Bai roared, it directly scurried towards the tree, but it forgot that it did not know how to climb trees. Therefore, its body slammed heavily into the tree. Although it was dazed from the collision, its weight of more than 100 kilograms was perfectly applied to the tree. This collision caused the oak tree, which was not thin, to sway. At that moment, although the squirrel standing in the branches hadn't been shaken down, it had given it a fright. After the fright, it flew into a rage out of humiliation. This big black monster actually didn't dare to resist. This made the squirrel very unhappy, so it prepared to continue going back to get the acorn to teach it a lesson. However, before it could return, the force of the shaking shook off a pile of snow at the top of the tree. Today's second update is continuously delivered. Please help me collect it. Thank you. Chapter 83. What? Bang. At this time, Jiang Hai had just arrived under the tree. He glanced at the stunned Xiao Bai and could not help but smack its head in anger and laughter. Does it think it's a cat? It still wants to run up the tree? Is it crazy? It turned out that the Caucasian's IQ was indeed a bit problematic. Even after eating Jiang Hai's blood, it could not help but act like an idiot. Just as Jiang Hai was about to pull Xiao Bai to the side, a burst of snow fell from the tree. This made Jiang Hai shrink his neck. When he raised his head and looked at the top of the tree, he happened to see a piece of snow falling from the tree. However, the direction was not toward him, but toward the squirrel that was about to go back to get the acorn. The squirrel did not consider the problem of disaster falling from the sky. When it reacted, it was already scared silly. It only saw a snow mountain. Well, to it was indeed a snow mountain. It crashed directly toward it without giving it any chance to resist. The snow mountain had already hit its head heavily and then smashed it into the snow pile under the tree. Seeing this scene, Little Yellow immediately rushed over and dug in the snow. He picked up a little fat squirrel that was still covered in snow. However, it was obvious that although the squirrel was still alive, it was also stunned by the fall. Its eyes were wide open and its little mouth was open. It looked at Jiang Hai and the two big dogs in front of it in surprise. Jiang Hai took the squirrel from Little Yellow's mouth and said angrily, "You're really lucky. If it were not for the thick snow pile on the ground and the fact that it was wrapped in a lot of snow, this would have been enough to turn the squirrel into a meat patty. It would not be like now where it was just a little stunned from the fall. Oh, this is a snow squirrel. It can be considered our first prey." Seeing the change here, Robbins and Bell also walked over. Robbins could not help but laugh when he saw the fat squirrel in Jiang Hai's hand. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be counted? Anything that is in my hands is mine. Hearing Robbins' words, Jiang Hai, who originally did not want to take the squirrel, suddenly nodded. Jiang Hai's thinking was somewhat different from the average person. When ordinary people saw animals, the first thing they thought of was whether the animal was dangerous or not. If it was not dangerous, they would be curious. Some people were sympathetic or overflowing with love. They would even make a fuss about whether the animal was cute or not. When Jiang Hai saw any animal, other than humans, his first thought was whether it was delicious or not. Whether it was dangerous or not was secondary. What was most important was whether it was tasty or not. This was just like the shark that he caught. Robbins and Ai Hua considered the danger, while he was thinking about shark fins and shark's meat. This time, Jiang Hai was a little reluctant to kill these chickens. It was good to keep them to lay eggs. As for the fox, it was still the same sentence. There was no need to consider it. Don't think that the dogs in Jiang Hai's manor were only used as cattle herds. They might not be able to fight against large animals, but they were good at dealing with foxes, weasels, and the like. So when they saw these things, Robbins and Bell didn't plan to make a move. These foxes were more useful than killing them because they would maintain the ecological balance in this forest. If they died, then rabbits, pheasants, and the like would proliferate. Although the birds among the seabirds could also help to solve some problems, these birds could only catch adults. They couldn't dig out the nests and there was no way to prevent the birth of cubs. This couldn't maintain the ecological balance. After all, the death of cubs was a very important part in nature. Of course, if someone had a child, they had to kill it. You know, foxes would eat children. As for rabbits and ordinary pheasants, although Jiang Hai was very interested in these things, it was obvious that Robbins and Bell weren't interested in these things. As mentioned before, the Americans didn't eat game because they were afraid of parasites in the game. In addition, they didn't eat rabbit dishes, and to be honest, if they didn't know how to cook, rabbit meat wouldn't be easy to get. In Jiang Hai's memory, the best place to eat rabbits was Sichuan, Wuxia. The rabbits there were the best. Because the rabbit itself had no taste, it would taste whatever it was cooked with. That's why the spicy and fresh taste made it delicious. Dry pot rabbit and soup rabbit tasted very good, unlike Bingqing where the rabbits were basically stewed and smoked. To be honest, the taste was very ordinary. At least, Jiang Hai wasn't willing to eat these things. Now that he saw these rabbits, to be honest, Jiang Hai was also a little envious. But considering that the snow was so cold and Robbins and Bell had helped him catch so many wyverns, he was a little embarrassed to ask them to help him catch rabbits. So he could only say goodbye to these guys for the time being. Along the way, Robbins and Bell also looked around. Not long after, they found their target, this time turkeys. Jiang Hai also looked over, but when he saw them, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. At this time, in the open space in the forest, there was a group of turkeys leisurely walking around. It can be seen that they were the same as the hazel grouse that Jiang Hai caught. These things also came in groups, but these turkeys were really ugly. Their black, fat and short bodies were like a tank, and their drooping necks made people feel a little disgusted. Turkeys and vultures looked very similar and they were equally ugly. But in the United States they liked them very much. It really made people speechless. Jiang Hai had only seen dead turkeys before. It is precisely because of this that Jiang Hai has been thinking that when he recruits again, that is, sailors and winemakers, he must not look for old men. He must look for a few young people. Otherwise he will be too bored. Fortunately, he is a homebody. If he is alone, he will go crazy. As for making friends in town, Jiang Hai expressed that he was not too interested. Jiang Hai was a person who was cold on the outside but passionate on the inside. He was the kind of person who would be happy if others took the initiative to talk to him and make friends with him. But if he had to take the initiative to make friends with others, then it would be difficult for him to do so. As for places like bars, to be honest, if no one takes him there, he will not go there in his life. But fortunately, his attention has been shifted to the construction of a basketball court. Since Jiang Hai had the idea of building a basketball court at home, he talked to Luo Binsi the next day. For Jiang Hai's idea, Luo Binsi said that there is no problem. If you want to build a basketball court, you don't have to wait until the beginning of spring to build it again. You can just change a warehouse. At most, you can just build a new warehouse. Jiang Hai's manor was originally built for 3 purposes: herding, fishing, and wine. And these 3 things, no matter which one it was, had a separate storage space. Wine naturally needed a cellar. Beef and fish need some cold storage. These cold storage can be turned into a basketball court with a little modification. After all, in Luo Binsi's opinion, there is no need to build something too luxurious for his own fun. There is electricity, water, and heating here. It only needs a small modification, a shower, and then some wooden floors where the basketball court needs to be built. It is a little troublesome, but it is actually not troublesome. As for the basket, it is the simplest thing. It can be bought. A basket is not $200 or $300. It is also responsible for delivery and installation. Jiang Hai has 1 venue. It is really convenient to have 2. His own independent basketball court. Jiang Hai didn't care whether it was particularly beautiful or not. At least now there was a place for him to play basketball, and the lighting must be very bright. Since he has decided to build it, the following things are much simpler. Although Jiang Hai does not know how to do it, Luo Binsi and the other cowboys are all little hands-on experts. During the break, they first helped Jiang Hai build the walls and separate rooms that should be smashed. Then they went to order a batch of large flooring. The flooring will be done by Jiang Hai himself. As for the ceiling lights and the transformation of the inner room, naturally Luo Binsi and the others will help. Unknowingly, another 5 days passed in a hurry. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, his basketball court will be completed in 3 to 5 days. Chapter 101. In basketball, the body was very important, but it was not everything. Otherwise, there would be almost no Caucasians and Asians. Just let those black muscles play on the court. Basketball also had rules. The accuracy of the shot, the reaction on the court, the vision, the tactics, the positioning, and so on were all very important. On the streets of the United States, there were many people with excellent physical fitness, but there were only a few who could enter the NBA. However, even though the body was not everything in basketball, it was the foundation of all basketball. A person who had perfect shooting skills but was made of glass would not be able to survive in the NBA. The physical test, as a person's positive data, was naturally the most important. The person who did the physical test for Jiang Hai was called Brian Bo. He could be considered half of Jiang Hai's hometown because he was also Chinese. However, he was an ABC. He only knew a little Chinese, but his English was very fluent. This made Jiang Hai feel a little out of place. It was not a happy thing to have to speak English with a guy who looked like someone he was familiar with. But no matter what, seeing that he was doing well in the NBA made him quite happy. After entering the equipment room, the first thing they did was a basic physical test, which was commonly known as a hardware test. Height, arm span, weight, etc. When measuring his height, Jiang Hai was a little surprised that he had grown taller. Height 189 centimeters, weight? Oh, who the F asterisk CK, you are not fat. Why are you so heavy? 240 pounds. Brian Bo looked at the number displayed in front of him and could not help but cry out in surprise. When he heard his words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, but then he nodded. He knew from the beginning that he would be very heavy. This was a matter of muscle density. Thinking about the Captain America in the Marvel world, he was 188 meters tall and weighed 240 pounds. His physical fitness could almost be regarded as the limit of human beings. Jiang Hai did not know who was stronger between him and the Captain America. After all, he had not traveled through time, but he was very sure that the Captain America's muscle density was very high. Your muscle density may even be able to block a bullet, Brian Bo said with envy as he pinched Jiang Hai's steel-like arm. As an assistant strength coach, they were actually the fitness coaches of the Celtics. They dreamed of having a body like Jiang Hai's. Jiang Hai just smiled. Then Jiang Hai measured other data. The arm span was 197 centimeters. Although it was longer than the average person, it was not particularly long. It was still within the normal range. Thinking about Jiang Hai's Avery and Bradley, who was 188 meters tall but had a 202-meter arm span. Jiang Hai's arms were not too long. The leg length was 107 centimeters. Although it was not very long, it was not too bad.